Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. Hello, fam. Last week, we posted up our 150th episode of Blueprints of Disruption. It was a good one, by the way. It featured Bruno talking about tenant unions and their victories. But I've learned a lot from every single one of those recordings, and this one is no exception, even though it is not our typical content. Santiago and I wanted to do a recording on ADHD and how it impacts us, the team creating the content that you keep supporting. To better paint the picture, we left in some very candid and personal moments, including our pre-recording banter back and forth, which is why in a moment you're going to just stumble right into a conversation about caffeine intake. We left these little moments in to help the audience better understand ADHD, but also to get to know us a little bit better. We also want to be open and honest in saying that we're dropping this pre-recorded discussion at a time when both Santiago and I are struggling in ways that I think will make sense after you listen. Some may even recognize themselves in our stories. Others may gain perspective on how to better accommodate neurodivergence in their circles. Whatever your takeaway is, be sure to share it with us. That being said, we jump right into our conversation on ADHD.
That helped. I also stuck my face in front of the AC, which helped. Yeah. No, because if I was to make caffeine, it would be hot, and I don't want to drink a warm beverage right now, and I have no energy drinks. And it's been... Part of the problem is, like, this is one of the damn things about it. Like, yerba mate will help me so much, but if I want to drink my yerba mate in the summer, I like to make it cold brew, and if I want to make it cold brew, I have to make it the night before, and sometimes I can do that, but sometimes...
No. People with ADHD can't base their needs off trying to remember to do something the night before. That's like when my partner's like, can you remind me to do... No, I can't remind you to do anything. Not maybe in the moment I can give you lots of advice on how it should be done that you don't want, but I absolutely can't remind you to do things. I don't remember to drink water. I will sit here and know that I am thirsty for so long and be like, yep, next task is done, I'm getting water. And then 30 minutes later, it's like, I never did get that water. Oh, I should have, but I can't leave this task now because I'll never get it done. So just this task, but that task leads to 3 more tasks. And I think it's been hours since I've had a sip of water. And so, yeah, there's no reminding anybody of anything. That's not a skill I possess.
No, but it's so annoying because like I'll do like a big pitcher of cold brew yerba mate, right? And it's good because like I my caffeine tolerance is at such a level that I need like constant top ups if I am drinking caffeine. Like it's not like I'll drink caffeine once and be good for several hours. No, I need to have a constant like low level amount of caffeine like constantly
is that what
in my
it is?
system.
Because I get to the bottom of my drink, my chosen drink or whatever, with caffeine, and I get kind of sad. Like when I realize, like, and if anybody takes that final sip, like even it looks like it's just an empty cup that hasn't been rinsed, and then I get like, sometimes I get upset. I'm like, what? That was it? Like I needed to tell myself this is your last sip, right? I have to mentally prepare myself to then go into withdrawal, I suppose, because I usually try to cap it at 1. But
No, and this beverage has like an absurd amount of caffeine too. It's like more caffeine than coffee, right? It's just great, and it's lovely. And you know, I add some like lime juice and some honey, and it'll be like the best iced tea you've ever had. But it also like requires so much like tea leaf. like the yerba mate leaf, like you're adding like scoops and scoops and scoops into this thing. So it's like so much of an effort to clean it out every day, and like I want to. My brain needs it, but my brain's also like, that's effort. Can you somehow do it without the effort? And
You need someone to just bring you a steady stream of your chosen caffeinated beverage. And to know when you're thirsty and hungry. You know, you love to cook, but everything you cook takes so much time and preparedness. I'm glad that at least that's taken care of. But I forget to eat.
I've started making, returning to my fancy ramen era. Those packs of like the stir fry ramen, not like the wet ramen. And I that's what I made for breakfast. It was like, I took like some Italian sausage, cooked that up, added chopped garlic, ginger, shallot, green onion whites, stirred it up into that, cooked the ramen. I added like the liquid ramen packet thing with like some egg yolks, a bit of like Peronaise, which is like a peri peri mayonnaise, and some soy sauce.
Peronaise.
Yeah, it's
it
great.
Doesn't sound nice. I think maybe it does explain what it is, but it really doesn't have an appealing. It sounds something like a medical term.
Oh, well, I love like medicine flavor, like Dr. Pepper.
Oh,
like,
I got you.
But no,
I like the smell of that,
it's
but
not
I don't.
that though. But no, like and then like with the green onion green, some cilantro. I would add peanuts, but I forgot to buy peanuts, and it was so good. It was tasty. That's my low effort meal, which is still like not low effort at all. Like it was still way more effort than it should have been, but for some reason cooking gets past I think it's because like the thing about cooking is it's also a stimulating process. Like there's
Lots of sensory things, right? Touch, smell.
Yeah, it's
like
fun.
Positive ones.
And there's like the reward.
Yes, there's a reward. But I love how we started talking about, your need to wake up, and I got a ramen recipe out of it. And I'll tell you that I started recording when you were outside trying to wake up.
Oh, shit.
I thought it would be neat to give people an idea of the banter that happens when we just kind of let go, especially when we're fully embracing our ADHD self, right? Santiago, you wanted to rant about it, and we will, but sometimes a little unfiltered is when you really get a taste, because I think we clean ourselves up a little bit for episodes and we sound like we have our shit together, and I think we both know that's not true. And all jokes aside, we're both ADHD. I'm also autistic. We talk about it sometimes on the show, but behind the scenes, we pretty much convinced ourselves that all of our guests, most of our guests, I feel like I'm like diagnosing a large amount of people. Many have been forthcoming, but, we just kind of look at each other after some episodes and we're like, yeah, they're part of the clan. And that's why our episodes go on so many tangents. So
after a while, you just know. Like, I swear, like, just there's a look in the eyes sometimes with people with ADHD. It's like, I just know. Or it's like a certain cadence in the way they speak. And it's like, yeah, I know what that is. I've seen that before.
And that only comes from like learning about it, because before you know what it is. I guess you've been diagnosed for a while, but for folks, you're just like, oh, that's what it is. And then, oh, that's what's going on over there. And it's just like real appreciation, I think, for someone's experience, because I'll be the first to admit that some of these traits can be annoying as shit to other people. But yeah, once you kind of recognize where it's coming from, what drives it, I don't know, you can be a lot more patient and understanding with kind of quirks that come with being ADHD. There are many.
Yeah. You mentioned diagnosis. I was diagnosed as a small child because I was the most stereotypical version of like boy with ADHD. Like the very like literally like jumping off of the walls, like literally like could not be in a seat for more than 5 seconds before like getting up and running around. Like it was like I was the child with ADHD. Like there was no like mystery about it. It was like, yes, this is incredibly obvious. But it's not like that for everyone, and it's actually not like that for most people, right? Like one thing that a lot of people don't know is that 90% of adults that have ADHD are undiagnosed. And I'd say that's something like I've definitely observed. Like there's a lot of people who I've known to get diagnosis later in life who like were very obviously to me ADHD, but they didn't get their diagnosis until like 20s, 30s, 40s, some people even later. Especially women, right? Because like back in the day, they used to think like ADHD was something that mostly affected boys, and then they never realized that, oh, that quiet girl in who is sitting there reading all during class has ADHD. You know?
Well, it manifests in so many different ways too. So masking has a lot to do with people going undiagnosed. So for folks who don't know what masking is, it's when neurodivergent people do their darndest to look and act as, I hate using this word, like as normal as possible. And when we say normal, it's just, we mean neurotypical. There's kind of like social behaviors, levels of conformity that we pick up on, because when we act like our true selves, we see the reactions in people, you know, like, oh, you're acting weird. There's all sorts of different words we can use. They're all hurtful and whatnot, but that's what you feel and you see. And so quickly folks learn how to mask and pass. And sometimes that means like overworking themselves. Sometimes it means just like not talking as much as they would really like to, subduing their emotions as much as possible. That sounds all great, but it's so harmful. Like if I have to mask, like example, okay, I'm going to give people like campaigning. So like going door to door, like I mean what I'm saying to people, but I have to put on a certain like persona that's really up, really chirpy, energetic at every door. And I do have to suppress a lot of the other traits that I know wouldn't go well. And like after a day of campaigning, not necessarily like the walk, like I am so emotionally exhausted from masking. There's other circumstances that I go into where I know I've been masking for hours, and it's so draining. Like I would rather do like hard labor than have to mask all day.
You know, it's a funny version of that is accent switching.
Oh.
Or like masking how like masking by speaking to people like they're speaking to you, right?
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
So I like, it happens to me a lot where like I remember I went on a cruise where I was around mostly Spaniards, and I swear I started like speaking in like an accent from Spain when I spoke in Spanish. Or sometimes like if I'm around other Latinos, my Latin accent will come out more than if I'm around white people. I'll start speaking more like Canadian accent. I don't know, you know,
Oh,
but
I'm
like,
sorry.
or even like the words you use, like the vocabulary you use is like so dictated by who you're around. Like that's something that happens to a lot of people with ADHD, and it's like those subtle things.
It's like, yeah, personality matching as well, right? Like you seem to be able to click with everyone because, you know, for a certain amount of time anyway, because you can recognize the traits, that, at least the ones that you like for the most part, and you kind of adapt to them because that's how you've gotten through the world so far, right? Is conforming these social gestures, and sometimes it's hard to articulate exactly all of the things that go into blending in or whatnot. But yeah, and that can happen like on an individual level too. You know, your bestie and you start talking the same, and yeah, you can really match each other's vibe quite quickly. It's not like acting though. It's not like we're pretending to be different people. It's like a survival tool. No, it's not intended to deceive at all in the moment. Sometimes it feels like afterwards, though, that we've tricked people into being our friends. Imposter syndrome plays into relationships as much as it does into jobs. Like, we're pretty sure we've also tricked anyone who's ever given us a job. Yeah. Like, we know we're good. It's like that mix, right? Don't you have that mix of bravado? Like, I know I'm good at all of these things. I know you do, right? Because I know that you're good at many things. Mostly the things you don't give yourself credit for, but we have confidence, but also like the ugliest level of imposter syndrome imaginable. Like, I just told Santiago I wish I could beat his insecurities out of him, full disclosure. I also then told him that I love him. He knows I mean it from a good place and I wouldn't actually hurt him. But it's hard to see that. It's hard to see this guy who's so smart and so good at what he does to have the same imposter syndrome that I feel that I can't get rid of either. So like, I'm one to talk.
It's absolutely brutal, the imposter syndrome. Like, I remember, like, for me, the worst it's ever been was when I was in music school. And I think I stayed in music school longer than I should have because of imposter syndrome, right? Because in my head, it was like, even though like this, I went to Humber Music, there was an audition requirement, like it's a celebrated institution of music, like it's supposed to be like difficult to get into. And when I got in, like the entire time it's like, oh, I tricked them. They think I know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And then I spent years trying to prove to myself that I did belong there. Because at every moment in time I felt like I didn't. And it always felt like, oh, I fooled you and you're going to notice and then you're going to kick me out. And then what am I going to do? But the imposter syndrome is it's not usually that obvious, I guess you could say. But it comes into play with so many things. And it's a product of the masking, right? Because it's like, oh, they're going to realize that I'm not who they think I am. And then they're going to hate me. Because also ADHD comes with like that rejection sensitivity, right?
Ooh, ouch. Yes. I don't even know if I can talk about that.
Yeah, I'll talk about it a bit, but it's a product of like, as a kid, people constantly, like to calm down, like sit down, don't be yourself, don't act the way you are, the way you are. No, like you gotta, like, I remember like I remember going into high school, my mom's like advice was to like just like keep a low profile, don't stand out, don't be different. And it's like that constant like suppress every part of yourself, like the constant like rejections as a kid lead up to like many people with ADHD having like a very strong reaction to not even like just real rejections, but like perceived rejections, like even like small little things like bring up that like a very strong reaction. It's a devastating feeling. And that fear of that controls so much of your life. And that's something that, I mean, that's a very documented part. Relatively newly documented, actually, like until a few years ago. And by a few years ago, I mean like 10 years ago, probably. But like until recently, people didn't know that was a part of ADHD. But now it's got like a lot of psychological documenting about like, people with ADHD really struggle with strong feelings of rejection. And it's one of those things that, when we say the word ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, it is just the worst name for something ever. It does like what it is. It's a name made by neurotypical people to describe their experience dealing with people with ADHD. It's like, well, they struggle with their attention and in some cases, not all cases, they're very hyperactive, and it couldn't be further from what like the actual experience of ADHD is. It's so much more complex.
Hyperactive, when you add that term in there, that's when you get like that textbook image you talked about at the beginning of like, especially young kids just like bouncing off the walls. Like my son literally climbs the wall. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We get that. But then there's also that crippling anxiety or indecision making, the lack of executive function. There's like a lot that plays into it, but I don't know how many times I've got like a million things on my plate. All things I believe are important, that are worth doing, that are not terribly traumatic, like, or difficult. And I will stand in the middle of the room frozen. Frozen. And someone would be like, "What are you doing?" And I would be like, "I don't know. It's not that I don't have anything to do. Believe me, on top of all of this other stuff, like I'm a mom. There's like always something you can do, but I will actually just be frozen. Then it's just like a matter of maybe I will go stim for a little bit, and then I'll just have to suck it up. And I don't know if I'm masking or if I'm what it is, but eventually you persevere, you get through it. You often feel silly for putting off some of the stuff. Like I'm talking about like sending the quickest, tiniest email. I know you understand, Santiago. I'm talking to the audience, right? Like just even making a choice on a form and sending it in. It's for some reason, it fills you with such like dread and paralysis. And you will procrastinate on something for longer than it would actually take you to do it.
Yeah.
And so when I hear hyperactive, I always contrast it with like those experiences as well. And I was like, well, that just does not fully explain my experience at all.
No, I have a story about that, which I think is one of the most absurd examples possible. But I had when in my photography class, by the way, like I love photography. I love this photography class. We had this photo story assignment and I got it done like 2 weeks early because I was so excited about it. Right. And it was great. Like it was a great assignment. Like I did really good on it. Right. I had finished it, ready. All I had to do was submit. I finished it 2 weeks early and I'm like, well, I have time. I don't have to submit it right now. And then it was late. And then it was 5 weeks late. It took me 5 weeks to submit an assignment that I finished 2 weeks early. Try explaining that to a professor. It makes no sense. Nobody who has an experience, anybody who has an experience ADHD, that sounds like the most absurd thing ever. And I don't know how to explain what it is there's this there's a YouTube channel called How to ADHD, which has been a huge resource for me for learning about my ADHD. And there's this theory that they talk about called the wall of awful, which is essentially this psychological barrier between being able to do any task. And the barrier is made up of failures, right? So every time you fail, feel those rejections, all of like the negative emotions, it puts like more bricks into the wall. And you have to climb the wall to be able to start doing something, any task. Like before you do a task, you're confronted with like that barrier. And climbing the wall often looks like you're doing nothing. And there's a few ways to like get through the wall that will long-term make it worse. Stuff like getting really riled up or, like that last minute panic. Like I'm the best student ever during the last 2 weeks of school. I can get any number of assignments done because I have to, right? Like the deadline mode of things. Or, strong emotions can like get you past the wall, but they add to it, right? And how it takes like sitting with something, feeling and developing strategies to be able to cope with those feelings, to be able to get through, right? But it's not like this easy thing. And it's with so many like small things. And there's so many tasks that are like so simple. Like I struggled to check my mail. Like I remember one time there was like something I really needed to get from the mail. It took me like a month to check my mail. And all it requires was going downstairs and turning a key. And then you do things and it's like, well, that was easy. And why was that so hard? And I should have been able to do that. And that adds a brick to the wall.
Yeah, and it's like if you think of what you got done, in the 5 weeks. So it's not like you were sitting on your couch, like literally paralyzed for 5 weeks, not handing that in or not leaving your home and walking by your mail. Your ability to do some things during those moments and then not others. We will be paralyzed for all of these kind of tasks, and then something will come up that's way beyond our capacity, but will stir the certain emotions, and all of a sudden we have energy we didn't think we had and focus that we haven't been able to have, and it just goes absolutely all in to these things in that moment. But you talked about like people might not notice and not being able to explain that, especially to a neurotypical person who wouldn't just see that as lazy or irresponsible. Right? And so when you organize with people, you deal with all kinds. And I'm telling you that if you are organizing around social justice, which you likely are if you're listening to the show, you are dealing with a lot of neurodivergent people, because high emotions, although, some are more easy to deal with than others, but with them comes a strong sense of justice and a high, debilitating even level of empathy. And when you put those two things together, it becomes people's life mission to end injustice. And so that is probably why many of our guests have been neurodivergent people, and why, like, when you're organizing, you have to assume that there are people facing these kinds of things that Santiago's describing, and that we can kind of continue to give our own personal perspective. But that wouldn't even scratch the surface of the levels of experience that come with being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world that is like unforgiving of people who can't kind of keep to structure or who can't sit still. Like if you just imagine a class or where you're writing an exam, and it's like physically paining some of those students to have to sit still. And that is their experience every single day, all day. And that happens like in an office. It's not appropriate for you to flit about and whatnot, or do your work on the floor lying down if you feel like it. Like all of these things just really aren't socially acceptable. And so we spend our entire days realizing that, But yeah, there's things I think you can do as an organizer and just a comrade to be more understanding, even if it makes no sense. That's the one thing about accommodations that I think people really need to get past, especially actually probably all people, because neurodivergent people always want an explanation as well. We want to understand everything. I think that especially comes with the hyper-focus and whatnot, but we're curious creatures. We're always asking questions. Sometimes it seems even combative that we would need to know so much before we participate. But it's just we genuinely want to know those answers. And so, yeah, these are inquisitive people you're going to be dealing with, empathetic, emotional, rightly so. And so, yeah, it's just when you need to accommodate people, you don't actually need to understand why. That's my point. Like, it may make no sense. Like, you may not understand why Santiago could not just go down to the mail and get it. You don't need to understand it, though. Like, if you were with Santiago and you knew this was happening, you'd be like, brother, give me your key. I'll be right back. Not like, why can't you go down there? Just do it. Like, I've seen you write like 5 essays between then and now. You can do stuff, right? But it's just like, you got to accommodate people based on their needs, not your understanding of them.
Yeah.
Right? It would help to understand them because you could do it better. But if someone just says like, hey, I need the notes ahead of time, I require this to participate more fully, we need to be able to accommodate those people and be understanding of it.
That's such a frustration because like you hear it in school all of the time when it comes to accommodations, when like a person, like one of the kryptonites of people who are ADHD is like deadlines, right? So it's often handing things in late. And when you hear like, well, that my least favorite phrase in school is like, that wouldn't be fair to other students. What are you talking about? Like, do you think like the way like there's no like it's the issue of equity versus equality, right? Like this idea, students have different needs. People have different needs. It's not fair to be dealing with these issues either. And you never know what someone is going through. And like this idea that like, that it's somehow better for all of us to have to suffer in the same way. It's just so illogical. Like it's not even, it just breaks down so easily, but it's so persistent in this pseudo meritocracy society where I say so because like we think it's a meritocracy. It's not a fucking meritocracy in any sense of the word. Yeah, that's just something I've seen a lot of people struggle with, and a lot of people with ADHD who are struggling with rejection sensitivity then like struggle to like be their own advocate, and they have to be their own advocate so much of the time because our society is not designed to help them. It's very difficult to be constantly having to explain yourself, explain why something is difficult for you, explain why you're struggling in any given moment, right? Like one thing like with ADHD is that gets past a lot of like the wall of awful stuff is novelties, right? One thing that happened to me a lot, and I've talked to a lot of ADHD students in my life, a lot of people go through this too, is like the first half of a semester is so much easier than the second half because everything's new, right? You have all these new experiences, so like you can really do a lot of great work. And then like something like reading week comes along and you have a week that just breaks those routines and habits that you formed. And then it's so much more difficult coming back from that. And so you'll take someone who was a good student and now they're a bad student. And the teacher's like, well, they're just lazy because they clearly could do it. And one like the phrases a lot of people with ADHD hear as kids all the time is like the so much potential, because clearly they're capable of more than what we're getting from them. So the fact that they're not doing it means that they're not trying. It means that they're lazy. And it's not the case.
I want to go back to like when you're talking about would that be fair to other students, and there's two things there, because we even hear that when we're talking about politics or whatnot, generational things. We're like, well, I had to do this or we didn't have that, so you don't need it. Yeah. And like that kind of mentality, I wish we knew how to break through that. But the other thing it opens up that's a little more specific to the conversation on ADHD and accommodations is that quite often the accommodations that work best for neurodivergent people would also work wonderfully for neurotypical people.
Yes.
We say the world is built for neurotypical people, but it's fucking not. It's just built for capital, right? We are just fucking minions in their machines to them, right? And so nothing's actually built schools are not built to neurotypical's best benefit either. And I think what best personifies this is like comfy spaces, okay? Especially autistic folk, I guess. Like sometimes I don't know for me, so I apologize to folks listening. I don't know where a lot of my stuff comes from, right? Because I went a long, long time not understanding myself. So I'm both ADHD and autistic, and I sometimes don't know what to attribute to what. But the idea of a comfy space is very important to folks who have like sensory issues, meaning like loud noises, bright lights, rough surfaces really bug us. Like that's an understatement. Like they make us feel not well, not like ourselves. Like it adds like a level of stress into your body, and it's called overstimulation, and it can really overwhelm us. So we try, if we can, to make the spaces around us as comfy as possible, as soft as possible, as like softly lit, calming. Some fidget toys make like noises, but like it's just like those damn poker chips you might hear in the background sometimes. I think you should leave them in for this episode so people can get an idea what I have to listen to. No, I'm just kidding. But these rooms are also very comfy and welcoming, and spaces are welcoming to neurotypical people. Do you not want squishmallows too? Well, we can't buy squishmallows anymore because they're made by Zionists. So I'm sorry to spoil that for everyone. But you know what I mean? It's not like they're adverse spaces for anybody. And what happens is that neurodivergent people just refuse to accept these spaces in ways that neurotypical people sometimes have no problem with.
Yeah.
Or at least they don't realize they're having a problem with. Like, they're more willing to accept sitting still for long periods of time because they can, and the hard chairs and the rigid rows and that authority that's been built into them. But neurodivergent people, we don't know what authority is, and we don't care. And so we're not going to be like, this is the way it is because someone said so. We're like, but this isn't ideal, you know? And so that sense of justice also plays into like, no, we want our spaces like that make us thrive, and we deserve it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like why the world isn't designed with these kind of comforts in mind speaks, I think, to capitalism and not so much like neurotypical people in general.
Yeah. And it comes back to the attention and attention deficit, right? Because one thing that ADHD people do not have is a deficit in attention. Let's be clear. It's entirely too much attention. That is the problem. And it's more of a struggle to regulate attention, right? Because what other people can easily tune out in an environment is much, much harder to tune out, right? So it's not that you're not all perceiving it. It's just, it's like if there's a sound, that sound is harder to tune out. If there's these distractions, everything is constantly fighting for your attention. It's like your brain is a bunch of volume knobs that someone else is controlling. Like someone else is changing the channel and the volumes are constantly going louder and softer. And that's what it feels like, right? For example, you know, as a musician, one thing I paid a lot of attention to is the acoustical quality of things, right? Like how a room or an environment sounds. And one thing I notice is like there's certain like environments that sound awful, and people tend to get more agitated in these environments, and they don't notice that their environment is affecting it, right? I notice because I look out for it, but even neurotypical people are driven a little bit crazy by this, but they're just not noticing that that's what it is. Like I had this one classroom that was super echoey, and people just hated being in it.
But that comes also from not knowing what it is. Like we think they're neurotypical, maybe even they think they're neurotypical, but I go back to that 90% of adults not even really knowing. And so not to say that neurotypical people should not have flashing bright lights and really loud noises all the time, because it will agitate them. But I keep thinking of those people like me, like I didn't understand why I would get so agitated in seemingly normal circumstances for everybody else until I understood that it could be bright lights, it could be loud noises, and now like I fine-tuned it, I know what it is. Yeah, like just making those spaces, assuming you're going to have neurodivergence in the space, and a bunch of people that aren't diagnosed, but I'm not sure that there's all that much that separates us in the end to like loud noises and flashing lights, or maybe that's just me. I mean, like, what is with it? Why?
No, it's more just everyone's annoyed by it. It's more of the ability to tune it out, right? I think that's what it comes down to. Is like, does this capture, like, are you unable to focus on anything else because of this? Or are you able to function through it?
I can't reconcile any of this with the fact that I loved to, I hate using this word, rave. We would just say party, but it's just so you understand where I was with like laser lights and smoke machines, and I would be next to the speaker most of the time. And that was my favorite place in the whole world to be. I still get goosebumps remembering certain parties in certain warehouses with the ceiling dripping water down on me. But right now, if I went in that space, I think I would lose my mind. If it wasn't my tunes, right? I don't know. This is going to be really audience specific. I would always be in the drum and bass room. Okay, that was my jam. Those were the beats that I needed. But the water was always sold in the house room. The house room was always like the big room, or sometimes techno, Rotterdam, and I would have to go into these spaces maybe to go to the bathroom or something, and oh my God, would my mood change. And my friends would kind of tease me. Like, they would go get my water. They would know, like, no, I'll get your water. It's in the house room. I'm like, oh, I would give him a look like, oh, don't make me go in there. And now I understand why I didn't like those beats. They were too straight. Like they irritated me. And there was, I don't know. I'm not a musician, so I don't know what it is. But even now, when I hear those beats, I'm just like, nope. So there's things that once you understand where they're coming from, they make so much more sense. And you weren't just that weirdo. Well, I'm sure I still appeared to be that weirdo that couldn't change rooms without basically melting down. But it doesn't seem weird to me now, at least.
No, and oh, fuck, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
That happens.
Very on brand.
I went on too many tangents and I didn't come back to where you wanted to talk to.
Like coming back to how it's not a deficit of attention. One thing people with ADHD can do quite well is hyperfocus on something that is of great interest. Now it's a thing it's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes that thing that you really want to hyperfocus on is something that it is not what you need to be doing in a moment. And it's impossible to focus on other things. But
give us an example.
Oh God, what's a recent? The thing is, I've been at home all alone, right? So like my recent examples are like
sometimes it's like a rabbit hole of research.
Yeah, or when I started playing, like I started doing board game nights with my friends recently, and like all I wanted to do was like play this board game. I started playing this board game online all the time, and it was like it captured a lot of my attention. Or
I've got one now.
Yeah.
My kid came home. He wanted to learn ASL. So I have just fully immersed myself in trying to teach not just myself. I think I've taken upon to make sure the whole family knows everything that we've learned that day. And they are so annoyed with me right now. And it's even like, do you have any deaf friends? They say, I'm like, nope.
That's a good one.
They go, well, is there a reason, you're so gung-ho into this all of a sudden? I'm like, you don't know me now. This is it. This is what we're doing right now. And you all just have to cope with it. I will have a skill coming out of it, but it's definitely not what I should be doing with my time.
I had a similar thing in first year where like a prof mentioned shorthand in like, oh, journalists used to learn shorthand. I'm like, what's shorthand? And then I learned all of shorthand, and now I can write in shorthand, and I haven't had to use it even once for journalism things. But
this is what he was doing the 5 weeks he didn't hand in that paper.
But like, yeah. And people with ADHD will have like a series of abandoned hobbies that like they really were in.
I don't know what you're talking about. There's a bag of macrame in the corner staring at me.
It's like that is like one of the telltale signs is like hobby jumping. And my parents hated it because they're like, I'm not going to spend money on your new hobby for you to abandon it in a couple of months. And I was like, no, I swear, this is the most important thing in the world to me. And like,
I am going to be a macrame artist for life. I will sell this at a farmer's market one day, right? With the little plants that I have growing too. Grand schemes, plans. And it's just like you lose interest. And it's like, yeah, what was I thinking?
But, and the thing is like, you can still like really care about these things, but it's more of like, as things go on, like ADHD just makes any sort of habits difficult. Like that's the thing is that, like I always say, every single time I drink water or brush my teeth or do like the basic human survival things, it is a decision. I am never on autopilot. I can never just do it. I need to decide to drink water, and it's a whole process. And it is so exhausting. Right. And like that's where you like get into like spoon theory. Right. Which for those who are not familiar, it comes from the disabled community. Like this idea of like you have a certain amount of energy a day, which is measured in spoons. I don't ever know why it was spoons, but just imagine like you got like 12 spoons. Right. And different tasks require like a different amount of spoons. And once you're done, you're done. You cannot do anything else that day. Like you have just maxed out. And so you have to be like really selective in the things you do.
And you don't wake up with the same amount of spoons every day, right? If you use up all of your spoons the day before, chances are you'll wake up with fewer spoons the next day. And this could accumulate until you wake up with like one spoon, and you'll be lucky if you can make the choice to kind of go drink some water.
And that's essentially what burnout feels like. Is like waking up with 0 spoons and being like, well, I have a day and I can't any of it. And then you go into spoon debt. And then, yeah, like burnout is just spoon debt.
We did 2 episodes on burnout. It was a mini series that we started and then burnt out. The participants burnt out, believe it or not. We will link them in the show notes. One is with me, and it gives a kind of real personal perspective on how I burn out and what I do. And there is another episode there that we kind of go into more what that is. But I want to make sure that we talk about the fact, like, the reason this kind of came up, and I think the reason Santiago's really chewing on ADHD and its impacts at the moment is because he's unmedicated for the first time in a bit.
Yeah, first time in 8 years. And not not by choice. I made the mistake of turning 25, which means that I'm no longer covered by my family's coverage. One thing with ADHD is that it exists with a lot of other things. Like, you never really just have ADHD. You might have, like, ADHD exists with autism, it exists with bipolar, but it most likely exists with anxiety and depression. Most people with ADHD have anxiety. Many will experience depression. So I was on, like, ADHD meds, anxiety meds, depression meds for a long time. And turned 25, and now if I wanted to get my medication, it would cost me like $300 a month because I don't have coverage, and I do not have $300 a month right now. So I'm sitting here like, how am I going to afford rent? If I can't afford rent, I definitely cannot afford my meds. So I had to stop taking my medication, and I'm like, I'm okay right now because I am in like this transition period where I'm waiting to get some things started. For many people, it's not okay. Going is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's a lot worse for a lot of other people. And people with ADHD are way more likely to be unemployed, underemployed, uninsured, underinsured. And that price tag is absolutely ridiculous. For like ADHD meds, they don't solve all your issues. They just make it a little bit easier they give you some extra spoons, they make it a little bit easier to deal with the world. And that is a heavy cost to pay. And so people with ADHD are way less likely to be able to afford those prices. And so, like, one frustration for me, like, especially, like, this is like back to the fuck the NDP and their bullshit watered down pharmacare bill, is people like me, people who have a lot harder situations than me, are being left behind. And it's not fair. It's not a fair system whatsoever. You know how we mentioned that number of like 90% of people with ADHD are 90% of adults with ADHD are undiagnosed. Like, the whole process of getting a diagnosis as an adult is absurd. It's incredibly difficult. Like, they'll be asking for your elementary school report cards. Who has that? Who even has their elementary school report cards? My mom maybe has that. I don't know where. My mom has ADHD, so I'm not sure that she has that organized somewhere, or that she even knows where she put it. But they make it an incredibly difficult process. And so much of like the systems of that ADHD people have to rely on are not designed to be ADHD friendly whatsoever. And so much of the issues we go through are so invisible that people will just be like, well, just get over it. Or, which is like one of the most frustrating phrases is the like, oh, everybody has that,
Oh, everyone's a little
ADHD.
Everyone's a little ADHD. You mean like distracted? That's what they mean. They mean they get distracted, or they walk into a room and they forget why they're there. And like, but that's not to say those folks aren't neurodivergent either, right? Like, it is a spectrum it's called a spectrum for a reason, and the level of undiagnosed.
You know who hears it a lot? Sorry, interrupting. You know who hears that a lot though is children whose parents are undiagnosed, right? Because it wasn't the same for parents' generation, right? There was so much less knowledge about these things, so that their parents went their whole life undiagnosed, struggled way harder than they had to, and then was like, well, that's just how the world is. Apparently, like they grew up thinking that's just how the world works, right? And so when their kid is going through these things, it's like, oh, that's just how the world works. I had to struggle like that. You have to struggle like that. And they don't realize that they were struggling more than they had to.
And it's tough because you do have to send your children into environments where it is that way, right? And so then you just have to give them the tools to cope as best as possible. But like some of these schools, like they won't allow him to have a hood up, for example. A hood up helps block the light. Like I went through university with a hood up almost the entire time. It helped me focus on what I was supposed to be focusing on. It kept the bright lights out of my eye. I grew out of a ball cap in high school. But anyway, there are environments where they're kind of brutally unaccommodating in certain respects. And so we either don't go into them, or if we do, it has to be with the understanding this is what's irritating you. This is what's making your day less bearable. But it's heartbreaking to not be able to go and say, like, can this classroom have dim lights? Can, you be more accommodating? And some of the teachers are really awesome, but, that's not always the case. And even sometimes, you have to go somewhere. You have to fly in a plane, or you have to go to an environment that is definitely not going to be accommodating for you. And I mean, that's where you get anxiety and depression too. Like those are byproducts of having to navigate unrelenting spaces.
Yeah.
All the time. And like on top of the personal relationship issues that occur because of some of the things that we've talked about. Just if we talk about your environments alone, a lot of them are really out of your control. The same way we talk about not getting COVID. That's a lot easier to do if you have a lot of money and you can control where you can go and where you don't have to go. But not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
A lot of life is just kind of persevering for neurodivergent people, and it takes a toll.
And so much of it's like is not obvious that it's going to be a struggle. Like one thing, for example, is a lot of people with ADHD, they really struggle with the transition between high school and post-secondary. Why? Because high school had like these rigid structures, and most people with ADHD hate the rigid structures, or at least they think they do, right? In the moment, because so much of that rigid structure is...
They're not their structures. Those are authoritarian structures, not built for them. They need to build their own structure.
There's a lot of problems with those structures. But then you get into like post-secondary where everything's wide open and self-regulated, and you never had to deal with that. And not having those structures just takes away all of the skills that you learned to adapt. And now you have to start all over. That's like one thing that like really sucked about the pandemic, for example, is, going through music school, I learned all of these ways to cope. The pandemic took everything I had learned away from me. And then I had to adapt again. And sometimes it's also like, it can be funny what's a better environment versus worse. Like I'll have like an example of my last 2 semesters. Like I had a class where it was entirely self-regulated. They're like, here, you write 10 articles by the end of the semester. Go. And that sucked because it's like, no, I need more than that. Don't just tell me by the end. I'll be panicking at the end. Versus like my newspaper class where it's like every day it's like right now. It's not a later thing. It's a right now. Gotta get the layout done now. Gotta get these stories out now. Gotta get everything edited now. And in that,
and you did great.
I loved it. I loved that environment. It worked perfectly for my brain. I was like, yes, let's go. I would forget to eat food. Hunger didn't exist,
That's how I have to talk to you from now on.
But that's so often like how it is, right? Like, so like, especially like as things are like everyone's talking about the benefits of work from home, right? And as things are like it's so mixed because like there's a combination of like the cozy environment of home while also not having those transition periods. Like I remember one thing I really missed during the pandemic was like my commute on the bus, because it was like this barrier that created like a transition between at rest doing work and then I was ready to do work when I got to school, versus like rolling out of my bed to the table beside me where I also played video games. Was like, well, I could just play video games, you know?
Wait, that's in the same room you are right now?
Yeah.
Are the video games in there?
Yeah. I have 2 rooms. I have a bedroom and a
No.
living room. There's 2 of them.
I'm going to tell Allie to hide the video games.
I mean, I would start hiding my remote, like my Xbox remote. I would like put it somewhere else. It's gone, and that would work. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I was like, that's easy. I have an Xbox. Sweet. And then it all starts back over again.
Yeah, but it's like it's all of these different ways that like it affects. None of this is captured in attention deficit hyperactive disorder. You know, like that does not capture the story. It's so much more complex than that.
It is. I think like, this definitely wasn't one of our typical rants, but we've created, I don't know how many episodes together now or how many you've listened to as an audience, but I thought when Santiago suggested we rant about it, I was totally on board, because I think sometimes it helps explain a lot. Right? It explains why you hear us go on tangents, and maybe you enjoy that a lot. That's us. And that's, why we'll admit sometimes our content is not super consistent. You can only imagine it's a small team, the 2 of us, and we both struggle with invisible disability. That sometimes makes it very, very difficult, but, that doesn't mean we don't draw joy from it or we avoid any of this work because we don't find value in it. It's just sometimes it seems like it's just too important and it scares you.
Yeah. It's funny how often the things I don't care about are so much easier than the things I really care about. Like, and it's frustrating because you're like, I care about this, so it should be easier, right? No. And one thing I want to say before we sign off is, as we said, that 90% number, which lives with me every day. A lot of people who listen to the show might recognize themselves in our stories here, are undiagnosed. If so, please, feel free to reach out. And I'm always down to talk about the experiences here. I've helped a lot of people I know get diagnosis later in life by just recognizing what they're going through. And I remember one story of a friend from journalism school who, after he got diagnosed, he told me, I'm so relieved because I lived my whole life thinking there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, and now I understand what I was struggling with. I'm not crazy. There is an explanation. And that's the thing about I have a lot of friends who are very skeptical about all things Western medicine, and I get it. But there's that benefit in the knowledge. And I think that's important. I think it's important to be able to because so many of us live thinking that we're crazy. And it's difficult. Another thing, too, is that if you have friends who are neurodivergent, you probably are, too. We show up in hordes. Pretty much every single friend I've ever had is some sort of neurodivergent. That's just how it works. So, and yeah, please reach out because it's better to know.
I do just want to say one thing as well before we go, and that is just to be extra compassionate with one another, because nobody beats themselves up better than someone struggling with these things already. And so when you're dealing with large groups of people where you know their stories, maybe you don't know their stories. And I understand our organizations and our movements, we have deadlines and things that need to get done. And it's important that the bigger the team that you build, the more easy it is to give people some space. But you just be absolutely as compassionate as you can and just assume that folks are struggling with something that you can't see. That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.